welcome to a Word for This Day podcast. I'm Jori Schaefer, the show's host and creator, and it is my joy and pleasure to welcome you today. Welcome to anyone who's found us for the first time. It's no accident that you are here today, friend. So please don't run off quite yet. Please stick around for a bit, and let's see what all the Lord has for us today. And welcome back to you regular listeners. I'm thankful that you're here another day. Thank you for thinking about God's Word together with me. Thank you for wanting to draw closer to Him, and I just want you to know that I continue to pray for you regularly, that the Lord would draw all of you closer to Him and give you more of a desire to know Him and to know His Word. And I pray that you'll be very intentional about your time with Him. Oh, friends, we must, even when we have curveballs. Let me tell you, usually my alarm goes off without fail, but the last 2 mornings it has not gone off, and I figure I've hit something wrong on my phone, and so it's just that kind of day. But please make it your priority that even when those curveballs of life happen, that you are going to purpose to spend time with Him, to focus back on Him, because there will be distractions. There will be bumps in the road. There will be things that you don't expect. But please, I encourage you, ask His help and just refocus your heart and mind on Him. The interesting thing was I was having a dream that I was late for work because I didn't get up. So my body knew that somehow, but it's just the strangest thing for all these years that my alarm goes off on my phone. So I've done something wrong on it. Anyway, pray for me on that I get that all straightened out. But I'm just so glad you're here. Please do consider sharing this podcast with your friends, family, neighbors, strangers, just anyone you think may receive a blessing from it. And know, as always, that I love to hear from you. I love to hear what God's doing in your life as you're spending more time with Him. Well, our verse for the day, for this 29th day of November 2025, comes from the letter to the Hebrews, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 29, and it reads as follows from the Legacy Standard Bible. By faith, they passed through the Red Sea as though they were passing through dry land, and the Egyptians, when they attempted it, were drowned. Oh, friends, if you've been with us already this month in Hebrews, we've talked about this Hall of Fame of faith a little bit, and if you've not been here with us, then that's okay. We're going to see where this fits in the letter, remind us what the writer was talking about, and kind of how he was going through the history of God's people. And I love it. And we can always learn things from this history. And so I'm so excited. And it is His story. It's the story of God's love and His grace and His mercy and His provision and His protection, His deliverance. And so it's just a wonderful story of mercy and grace. And I'm excited for us to park it here today and think about these things again. But you know, if you've been on this journey with me before, that this is the time that I think it's a good idea for us to look at where we are in the Scripture. What book or letter are we in? Who may have written it? What was going on? That helps us to better understand and apply and recall and share. And then we can also know if somebody's coming in and trying to twist things around on us. So we know that we are in the New Testament, and we are in that section known as the general letters. Remember, the New Testament begins with the 4 Gospels, which tell us the good news of Jesus' earthly ministry, what He did while He was here, tells us about His life, His death, His burial, His resurrection, His ascension, and God used 4 different men from 4 different backgrounds with 4 different writing styles to tell us that. After the 4 Gospels, we see that book of Acts, which is the book of early church history, how the gospel began to spread. And then from there, we go into Paul's letters, 13 letters written by the Apostle Paul. And then from there, we go into the general letters, which were other letters written by men who were thought to not be Paul. Now, all of those other letters, except for this one, tell us who wrote the letter. But this letter to the Hebrews, we don't have an author listed. Some scholars and theologians and believers think that Paul wrote this because of some of the ways that things were stated. Some don't believe that. The bottom line is we don't know for sure which human wrote it. So it's included in that general letter section, and there's 8 of those. And then after that is that book of Revelation. And that's that book of New Testament prophecy. And so we know that this writer of the letter to the Hebrews was a Hebrew. He was an Israelite. We don't know his exact lineage, but we know that he understood the Old Testament law. He understood, with God's help, how this all fit together. We know that he was a believer. And he was encouraging fellow believers, fellow Jews who were believers in their walk, and encouraging them in the things to come, and to make sure that they did not fall away or drift away. He encouraged them to grow up. He warned them about being very careful. And so I love this letter. And even though it was written to Hebrews, our fellow Jews, we can learn so much from this, and I'm just very thankful. Now, this writer told the people what kind of letter it was and why he was writing. If you look over here in Hebrews chapter 13, verse 22, he says, "But I urge you, brothers, bear with this word of exhortation, for I have written to you briefly." It was a word of exhortation. Exhortation is a spurring on and encouraging, but there is also often warnings, or also there are often warnings, admonitions, things to watch out for as you're going on your way, and that's very much what this writer did. I love that he goes back because he knows, being a Jew himself, or a Hebrew himself, what would have been important in their mind, what some of their sticking points would have been. And so he goes all the way back at the very beginning and says, "God, having spoken long ago to the fathers in the prophets in many portions and in many ways, in these last days spoke to us in his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom also he made the worlds, who is the radiance of his glory and the exact representation of his nature, and upholds all things by the word of his power, who having accomplished cleansing for sins, sat down at the right hand of the majesty on high, having become so much better than the angels, as he has inherited a more excellent name than they." So the writer goes back and said, all the way in our history, God used the prophets to talk to us and to talk to our forefathers. But now he's chosen his Son, and his Son is the exact representation of the nature of God. He is the radiance of the glory of God. He was there when the worlds were made. It says, through whom he also made the world. So God made the worlds through Jesus. And we see that in John's Gospel, at the very beginning of John's Gospel, where we read that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. So that matches very much what this writer to the Hebrews said. Now, one big overriding theme that you will see throughout Hebrews is that Jesus is better. Jesus is superior in all ways, in all things. He was superior to the angels. He was superior to Moses. and the law. He was the great high priest from a different priestly order. He was the one time for all perfect sacrifice. He was the mediator of this new and better covenant. His sacrifice, what he did, was perfect. And so we see that all the way through. And, if you would have asked me several years ago, before I was blessed to be able to spend several weeks with my Bible study sisters studying Hebrews, if you would have asked me what Hebrews was about, I would have said, there's a lot of things in there I don't understand, but I know there's a lot about faith. There's that Hall of Fame of Faith chapter, and it talks, and then there's within there how the Word of God is living and active, and those would have been the big things that I would have remembered. But this book, or this letter, I should say, has just treasure upon treasure upon treasure, and it helps us to understand more of what we read in the Old Testament. We see how God fits it all together. God had a plan from before there was time about how this would fit together, because he's not bound by time. And he could see how people would be, and yet he loved us anyway. Yet he still sent his son. And Jesus, who was there from the beginning, knowing how we are, came anyway. He took on the punishment that we deserved, knowing how we are. While we were yet still sinners, Christ died for us. He saw the things that the Father saw. He knew. He's one with the Father. He knew how we were and how we would be. And yet he came anyway, even for just a few. He came for the whole world, but knowing that not everyone would accept him. And friends, what kind of love is that? That he would love us so. But I love that this writer of the letter to the Hebrews begins to help us fit some of those pieces together. I think I told you this earlier in the month, or maybe it was another month, last month when we were in Hebrews, but I heard one apologist who I think very highly of, when he was asked, what's your favorite book in the Bible? And he said, you're going to think it's strange, but I have two when taken together, and it's Hebrews and Leviticus. And, not very many people will pick Leviticus as their favorite book. For most of us who have started a Bible reading plan, a lot of times our forward progress stalls out in Leviticus. We think, oh no, I don't understand all this. But when we look at the big picture, and we see that God gave his law to his people when they were wandering in the wilderness, those chosen people that he brought out of Egypt, out of bondage. They were a chosen people set apart, and he gave for them a law, rules, and statutes to help them be a people set apart. And he chose from among the Levites, that's where we get Leviticus, he chose from the Levites those who would be priests and those who would be in charge of worship and all of those things to help the people to know, and to be the ones that would lead the people and to try to intercede for the people. And he gave that law, and that was something of a shadow, as we read about. There's shadow of the true heavenly things. And so when we see all the things that he did then, but then we see that Jesus was the fulfillment of the law and the prophets, and Jesus was the one who went into heaven and took care of all this. The Levites and the children of Israel had to do all these sacrifices, but they had to do them over and over and over again, year after year. But when Jesus did it, he was perfect. His sacrifice was perfect, and he didn't have to do it over and over again. It was one time for all. And it wasn't just to cleanse just for a short time. It was to completely give cleansing and forgiveness. And friends, that is profound. And so we see how this all fits together when you know what was happening in Leviticus, and then you see God's grace and mercy and Jesus' love for us as well when he came and was that one time for all sacrifice. So that's a little background about Hebrews. Now, where we find ourselves today is that the writer has gone through a lot of this. He's talked about how Jesus is superior. He's talked about how Jesus is that one time for all sacrifice, and he's given warnings to the people not to fall away, not to profane the blood of the covenant. They have been enlightened. They have been given this truth, and they don't need to walk away from it. And I love what he writes here, but it's also a very grave warning, I should say. He says in chapter 10, verse 26, for if we go on sinning willfully after receiving the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins, but a terrifying expectation of judgment and the fury of a fire which will consume the adversaries. Anyone who has set aside the law of Moses dies without mercy by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. How much worse punishment do you think he will deserve, who has trampled underfoot the Son of God, and has regarded as defiled the blood of the covenant by which he was sanctified, and has insulted the Spirit of grace? Such a dire warning. He says, it is a terrifying thing to fall into the hands of a living God. But remember the former days when, after being enlightened, you endured a great conflict of sufferings, partly by being made a public spectacle through reproaches and afflictions, and partly by becoming sharers of those who were so treated. He says in verse 35, therefore do not throw away that confidence of yours which has a great reward. For you have need of endurance, so that when you have done the will of God, you may receive the promise. For yet in a very little while he who is coming will come and will not delay. But my righteous one shall live by faith, and if he shrinks back, my soul has no pleasure in him. But we are not of those who shrink back to destruction, but of those who have faith to the preserving of the soul. And then he says at the beginning of this chapter 11, now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. For by it the men of old gained approval. By faith we understand that the worlds were prepared by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things which are visible. And then he goes on from Abel to Enoch to Abraham, spends a lot of time with Abraham, and then Isaac and Jacob and Joseph. And I'm going to pick up there where Joseph went down to Egypt, and then we're going to read through to our verse for the day about Moses. He says, by faith Joseph, when he was dying, made mention of the exodus of the sons of Israel and gave commands concerning his bones. By faith Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents because they saw he was a beautiful child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. Regarding the reproach of Christ, greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the rage of the king, for he endured as seeing him who was unseen. By faith he kept the Passover with the sprinkling of the blood, so that he who destroyed the firstborn would not touch them. And then here's our verse. By faith they passed through the Red Sea as though they were passing through dry land, and the Egyptians, when they attempted it, were drowned. So what the writer of this letter is doing is giving a chronological history of the people of Israel up to the present day. And he continues on that. But in this section, he's talking about Moses' faith. Even though Moses was not keen on doing what God asked him to begin with, he didn't think he was qualified to do it. But he did do what God said. He did obey, and God used him in a mighty, mighty way. And we see that, his parents had faith. And they had so much faith that they did not do what the king said. We know that Moses grew up in the house of Pharaoh. He was the son of Pharaoh's daughter, the adopted son of Pharaoh's daughter. We know that he stayed there till he was about 40, until he had an episode where he needed to flee, and he fled to Midian. We know that he was a shepherd for his father-in-law for 40 years, 40 more years. So he was 80 years old when God appeared to him and made known what he would have him to do when Moses saw that burning bush. And as I mentioned, Moses asked God to send somebody else to do it. And God told him he would send his brother Aaron with him, but he was still going to do what he was going to do. And so Moses did do that. And we see that he went down several times as God directed him and confronted Pharaoh, and there were the plagues. That's not mentioned here. But then we see that when it was time after the Passover, that they came out of Egypt, and that's where we get to our verse for the day. Now I want to hop over to Exodus so you can hear exactly what the word says about them coming out of the land of Egypt and about the Lord parting the Red Sea. Now I want to pick up here in chapter 14 and read this account of Israel crossing over the Red Sea. But right before that, it talks about how there were pillars of cloud and pillars of fire. This was before they crossed over, that the children of Israel had been able to witness this. And that's what God used to guide them. And we're going to see as we read this that they grumbled some in this, and they didn't think that it was going to be successful, and they wanted to go back to Egypt, even as they had seen these mighty wonders of God. They had seen God come in with the plagues. They had seen him deliver them and save those who had the blood of the Passover lambs painted over their doorpost and that sort of thing. And so when we read this and we see that they did keep going forward, even though they grumbled, know that there had to be an element of faith for them to not run back, because there was one Moses, and there was at least 600,000 men on foot of the Israelites, and there's thought that there may have been as many as 2 to 2.5 million total that came out of Egypt when you take into account the women and children. So they could have run back. They could have overpowered Moses, but it took an element of faith, even though they grumbled, to move forward. So listen to this. It says in chapter 14 of Exodus, "Now Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel so that they turn back and camp before Pi-hahiroth between Migdol and the sea. You shall camp in front of Baal-zephon opposite by the sea. And Pharaoh will say of the sons of Israel, They are wandering in confusion in the land. The wilderness has shut them in. Thus I will harden Pharaoh's heart with strength, and he will pursue them, and I will be glorified through Pharaoh and all his army, so that the Egyptians will know that I am Yahweh." And they did so. So God did this so that he would be glorified, and so that the Egyptians would know, and so also that his people would know. It says, "Then the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and his servants was changed toward the people, and they said, What is this we have done, that we have let Israel go from serving us? So he made his chariot ready and took his people with him, and he took 600 choice chariots and all other chariots of Egypt with officers over all of them. And Yahweh hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, with strength, and he pursued the sons of Israel as the sons of Israel were going out with an exalted hand. Then the Egyptians pursued them with all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen and his army, and they overtook them, camping by the sea beside Pi-hahiroth in front of Baal-zephon. Now Pharaoh drew near, and the sons of Israel lifted up their eyes and beheld the Egyptians were marching after them, and they became very afraid. So the sons of Israel cried out to Yahweh. Then they said to Moses, "Is it because there were no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What is this you have done against us in bringing us out of Egypt? Is this not the word that we spoke to you in Egypt, saying, 'Leave us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians'? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than for us to die in the wilderness." But Moses said to the people, "Do not fear. Stand by and see the salvation of Yahweh, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you have seen today, you will never see them again forever. Yahweh will fight for you, and you will keep silent." Then Yahweh said to Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Speak to the sons of Israel so that they go forward. As for you, raise up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and split it, and the sons of Israel shall go through the midst of the sea on dry land. As for me, behold, I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians with strength, so that they will go in after them, and I will be glorified through Pharaoh and all his army, through his chariots and his horsemen. Then the Egyptians will know that I am Yahweh, when I am glorified through Pharaoh, through his chariots and his horsemen." Then the angel of God, who had been going before the camp of Israel, moved and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them. So it came between the camp of Egypt and the camp of Israel that there was the cloud along with the darkness, yet it gave light at night. Thus the one did not come near the other all night. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and Yahweh swept the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and made the sea into dry ground, so the waters were split. So the sons of Israel went through the midst of the sea on the dry land, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Then the Egyptians pursued them, and all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen went in after them in the midst of the sea. Then at the morning watch, Yahweh looked down on the camp of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and cloud, and brought the camp of the Egyptians into confusion. And he caused their chariot wheels to swerve, and he made them drive with difficulty. So the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from Israel, for Yahweh is fighting for them against the Egyptians." Then Yahweh said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, so that the waters may come back over the Egyptians, over their chariots and their horsemen." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal state at daybreak, while the Egyptians were fleeing right into it. Then Yahweh overthrew the Egyptians in the midst of the sea, and the waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen, even Pharaoh's entire army that had gone into the sea after them. Not even one of them remained. But the sons of Israel walked on dry land through the midst of the sea, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and to their left, and on their left. And that matches exactly what this writer of the letter to the Hebrews said in our verse. By faith they passed through the Red Sea as though they were passing through dry land, and the Egyptians, when they attempted it, were drowned. They had to trust God to walk forward. Even though they were afraid, even though they grumbled, they still took that step of faith and followed. And God had been so gracious to them to give them evidence of his sovereignty and give them evidence that he was in control. When you look back at the plagues, when you look at how he moved the pillar of cloud and fire between them and the Egyptians, and imagine what it must have felt like, because when you move water or water dries up from an area, right after that it's still squishy, and muddy, but they walked through as on dry land. So that had to be an encouragement to them. God was faithful. They proceeded through. Moses proceeded through on faith, and God fought for them, and he took care of them. And he does the same for us, friends. It may not make sense. We may seem that we're surrounded on all sides or that it seems hopeless, but we can take God at his word. He is faithful. He does what he says. And so we just must trust him and encourage one another all along the way to do the same. Blessings to you, friends. Until next time.